Thank you. So welcome everyone. I always love to start the land acknowledgement in an embodied way because these aren't just words, right? We're walking this, we're embodying this. We are feeling the fullness of this. So I'm going to invite us all into this land acknowledgement, maybe wiggling your toes and feeling into the soles of your feet. Even if you're not actually standing on the land right now, the land is here to listen and to feel you and to hold you. So breathe into that. Feel the soles of your feet. Feel the roots that extend from the soles of your feet, planting themselves into the land. We're going to acknowledge that the land has a spirit. The land has a spirit that has seen and witnessed and observed so much. The land has taken so much for us. The land has transmuted so much for us. So we're going to first start with gratitude. Sending gratitude from our hearts, from our spirits, down through our bodies, into the soles of our feet, and through those roots. I invite you to close your eyes as we experience this. Breathing in, pushing those roots down through all of the floor, all the way down to the earth tonight. Feeling that land and really acknowledging, I see you. I see all of those whose land this is. I see those who steward this land and care for and love this land. I see all of those who are still here. And today, with your roots moving into the earth and the soil, I acknowledge that I am standing on the lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Huron-Wendat peoples who still walk this land, who love this land, who care for and tend to this land. And you feel your own roots. Feel into the lands that you are standing on. If you wish, acknowledge those lands out loud. Speak them from those roots up into your heart and out through your voice. I am standing on these lands. I acknowledge the spirit of the lands. I acknowledge my ancestors who stand here with me. We call on that, and we call on that energy, and we send deep gratitude for all of those who are here. And as we acknowledge that, feel your roots going out to your own lands and bring that medicine here too with us tonight. When I first read Kaitlin's book, there was this deep remembering, this deep activation of cellular blood, bone, DNA memory. Tears flowed down my face so many times as I read this book. And this is why this book is so vital as medicine for this earth, as medicine for this world, because we all need to remember. Remembering helps us bring forward all of the truth from the past into the present. Remembering helps us to really feel it, acknowledge it, validate it, all that has happened to our people and to this earth, into the land. So this remembering, this beautiful remembering through Kaitlin's words that I experienced, I know that others have too. And I celebrate this book tonight. And I'm going to call upon the ancestors. I'm going to call upon our Ojibwe directions, for those are the ones that I work with, just to really amplify and celebrate and honor this 1-year anniversary of this brilliant book and the medicine of these words that have been, shared globally. May they continue to ripple out and create more remembering for all of us. May they continue to bring us together so that we may heal the past and the present. May they continue to work us in that way of truth and reconciliation and bring us back to our hearts. And I have some medicine here. As I send this prayer, Kijumanado, great creator, I ask that you hold this space in your sacred reverence. We are grateful for your presence here. Miigwech, miigwech. Beautiful Migizi, as you soar into this space, we ask for your visionary medicine as you bless Kaitlin and Native. As her vision continues to soar around the world, her words continuing to bring forward this remembering, miigwech, miigwech. To the deer of the south, Wabash Keshe, I thank you for coming here tonight, for spreading your compassion and your ease and your gentleness, for reminding us that we are enough. Miigwech, miigwech. To the buffalo of the west, Mashko de BGK, I thank you, beautiful buffalo. May you bless our space with abundance, abundance and beauty. We thank you, beautiful buffalo. Miigwech, miigwech. To the Makwa of the north, Great Bear, I welcome you and I thank you. Hold this space stable. Bring your medicine of boundaries. Remind us that it's okay to cycle into rest. We thank you, beautiful bear. Miigwech. Aki Kwe, Earth Mother, rising through our feet. Father Sky, the stars, and the ancestors, Nokomis, Mishomas, Miigwech, miigwech. May Kaitlin and Native, the words and the medicine that she has expressed through these pages, be felt by all. And may it continue to ripple out in the 7 generations to come. Miigwech. Thank you for being here. I send you all of my love and my gratitude, and I send prayers and visions for Kaitlin's medicine to just continue moving forward as it is. Thank you so much. Have a beautiful night.
Oh, Miigwech. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm so excited to just be joining all of you. And I also just want to thank Brazos and Baker for putting this on, for jumping in and creating this event for me. I was just so excited that we were able to pull this off, and in a time when things have to be virtual, so I'm so grateful. Tonight, we're going to be covering 10 lessons from Native, 10 lessons that kind of came out of, this book being in the world for a year. And so I thought, I don't want to just sit here and tell you the 10 lessons, but I would love to be in conversation about these lessons with friends. And so I'm so excited to have a few friends here. So let's jump into lesson number 1. And I'm excited to talk about this with, another Indigenous woman. And I think that that's really important. And so lesson number 1 is, I do not speak for all Native peoples, or we are not a monolith. We are not a monolith as Indigenous people. And a lot of times, this, that, there are these preconceived ideas of who we are as Indigenous people, and especially as Indigenous women, right? How do you fight those stereotypes in your work, in the work that you do? How do you, share that your work is yours, but that it also celebrates your identity? It celebrates who you are in the world. So do you want to speak a little bit to that?
Sure. This is a constant journey for me. I think that I'm always coming up against those stereotypes and biases every single day. And I have to be really mindful of just coming back to myself and my own system. So I've worked really hard on boundaries. I think that's been the biggest medicine for me to really be clear on who I am and who I'm not, and be clear in my energy and how I show up in the world. So authenticity, asking myself, constantly being in communication with my ancestors and spirit as to what my path is, and the medicine that I walk in my own moccasins. I always ask, am I walking in my own moccasins here? Because I can see how sometimes I can get pulled out into thinking, maybe I should walk that way because that's what others expect of me or want from me or expect me to be. So grounding and rooting in my own moccasins, I'd say, is a huge thing. And that really has to do with the boundary work that I try to engage in every single day.
I love that so much. And I, when I was writing Native, I had to keep going back to that. Like I'm sharing my story, I'm sharing my experiences in hopes that people will take that and learn from them. And maybe that will help them open their, their worldview to other stories and other experiences, and I love that kind of like asking about your own moccasins. I think that's such a beautiful picture. I love that so much. All right, so lesson number 1, that we do not speak for all Indigenous people, and we are not a monolith. We're not all the same. Our stories are so different and varied, and that's why you should read our books and follow us on social media. There's so many. Watch our films, watch Rutherford Falls, watch these things and see us in our complexity as humans, So that's lesson number 1. Lesson number 2, decolonization is always an invitation. This was, one of the most important things I tried to share in Native was not that decolonization should be taken lightly, but that I wanted to frame it as an invitation so that people would not be afraid to step into what it might mean for their lives, because sometimes I think people shut themselves off before they can get there, before they can ask those hard questions. And so I wanted to be able to frame it that way. Have you thought of it as an invitation? Is that how you think of decolonization, or how have you framed it within your life? What does it mean to you?
I love that. I think that is such a that again is a constant journey. And I realize, I mean, my grandparents in residential school, like I am really colonized. And I that's just, my they wanted me to assimilate. So it's kind of in my bones to like crack that open and break that open has been such a hard journey. So I think I just see it as a journey that I'm never going to get there. I'm never going to be perfect. And an invitation makes it, it's such a beautiful reciprocal energy because I think we're doing it together. And
Yeah.
if we're not so hardened and rigid and saying like, this is the right way, this is the wrong way, you're doing it wrong, and shaming people because, that I don't think that's helpful. So I have sort of the framework of I'm doing it with you. Let's do it together. So I love that invitation because that really speaks to how I kind of show up in the world. And I think it's more helpful because it leaves more spaciousness for us to learn, to fall, to fail, to get back up, and to try again.
Yeah. And when you do healing work, and when we're using words to help heal and using these practices, what happens is that different people need different ways to do this. Different people have to heal in different ways. We have to decolonize in different ways because we're all coming from these different places. Now, the end goal should still be decolonization itself, or, to end colonial systems and end oppression. But we have to come from our own story of what it means. And I think that that's something that you help people do, right? Is to to give them the space to ask themselves, how do I heal? What is my healing journey? And I think that's really important work as well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think our ways of, I mean, we can only do it in our way too, right? And yes, it's so important to be really conscious, and it's a responsibility, right? It's a responsibility we carry. So I think that doing it our own way and just like listening to that connection to spirit and our ancestors calling us to decolonize all aspects of our life is
Yeah.
so vital.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. So that was the first two lessons, quick and easy. And we're going to move on to lesson number 3. And I'm going to be sharing this lesson with you. In my recent speaking events, I've been sharing this as one of the lessons. I just think it's an important one that we need to talk about. This lesson is whiteness is a system, not a finger point. And I share this with people because, we have to realize that our systems define us, right? And we have to be able to talk about these uncomfortable things in order to dismantle harmful institutions, that don't allow all humans to be fully loved and fully seen as sacred. America was founded on, it continues to remain because of these systems of whiteness and white supremacy that have brought us to this point. And so, I realized this was an important lesson because I have a chapter in Native called The Problem of Whiteness. And I've had people, email me or message me and tell me they didn't read the book because I had a chapter that was framed this way. And that made me so sad because I'm not writing it as a finger point, but I'm writing it because we need to examine these systems. I'm not here to tell anyone that being white is wrong. As a white-coated Potawatomi woman, I'm someone from a mixed culture, mixed ethnicity. I'm not here to point a finger at anyone's skin, but I am here to point the way to solidarity, right? I want to recognize that systems of whiteness aim to destroy some and uphold the power of others. And this is not what it means to practice kinship, to practice belonging with one another. And so this is the lesson, that we have to recognize that we're calling out a system that we belong to or that we participate in. And we have to point to those systems so that we can change or dismantle them. But when we, have this reactionary moment, when we get wrapped up in that, I'm not like that, we lose that opportunity to create change. And so we have to recognize, like the lesson says, that whiteness is a system. It's not a finger point, it's a system, and we have to talk about it. And so, when we're talking about it within Christianity, we remember that people have been oppressed by the church. People have been oppressed in the name of Jesus. They have been told that they can't know God in the way they were born to know God. And that has given us these serious sort of splits and fractures in the world. And so we have to center ourselves in this work. We have to be present to moments like this when we're hearing these words and trying to understand it, what can we do right now to dismantle these systems of whiteness that are so oppressive and that are fueled by hate? I want you to ask yourself that question along with this lesson. Begin to ask, where do I see whiteness taking from others? Where do I see these systems being on display? And this is where we begin to learn the lesson. We begin by simply paying attention. Pay attention to the stories we tell in America. Pay attention. And that actually leads to our next lesson, which is lesson number 4. Indigenous people can't exist in your present if we don't exist in your past. Indigenous people can't exist in your present if we don't exist in your past. In other words, tell the truth about history, right? So if we're talking about from that last lesson, these systems of whiteness, well, we can't get there unless we're honest about history. And so I want to read to you from Native. I have kids who are in school, and so it's been a lot as they're getting older. They're in elementary school and trying, every single year, and I write about this in Native, trying to kind of show up at the school, show up to that table, and know that, when Columbus Day rolls around, when Thanksgiving rolls around, that there's going to be a lot of hard stuff to work through, and there's going to be things that come up that are part of these colonial systems of oppression, that are not for Indigenous children. And that we have to fight against history. And what we find is that, if we are barely talked about, then we're barely going to be acknowledged now. It's just not going to happen. So this is a section of the book called Stereotypes and Survival. And it's just a short little section I want to read to you. I struggled with what to tell my son's kind teacher when I knew he was receiving confusing messages about his own identity and how it fits in a history book. I struggled with how to tell the school that they were teaching my children that in essence, their own native kin must have died a long time ago. What confusion must this cause for my 5-year-old? A boy who ends up separating his own Potawatomi identity from the natives talked about in history books, those who, they say, befriended pilgrims and then happened to get sick at some point and die. Everything we teach our children becomes a part of them, and we cannot deny that. If Indigenous children see cartoons of Indians shooting bows and arrows at cowboys and unsuspecting pioneers, they will begin to imagine their own relatives as those merciless savages. Exactly what we've been called throughout history. We must hold our education system accountable for the racist attitudes it instills and allows, and we must speak up when the truth isn't told. Children do not learn the glorious diversity of Indigenous peoples in the world or throughout North America. They learn the version of us told through a white man's eyes, a version portrayed in an old Western or in Disney's Peter Pan or Pocahontas. So, if we don't exist in your present, we don't exist in your past, then it's really hard to reckon with history, right? It's really hard to tell the truth if there's nothing coming together here. And then it's really hard to talk about these systems of whiteness. So see how it all goes together, and these lessons are meant to go together. And of course, please read my book if you haven't yet, because it's all in there. And I think it's just really important that to connect these dots, we have to start telling the truth. So let's move on to lesson number 5. And I want to invite Barbara to join me here. I'm so grateful that she could be with us tonight.
I love it. You trust me to know how to do all this. That's wonderful. Hi.
We're going to make it.
Right.
So lesson number 5 is we're going to be sharing about all humans need to honor our connection to the earth. And Barbara, I realized when I was writing Native, I was thinking about how so much of my own poetry and my books and my words are formed when I'm outside, or even when I'm staring out a window, when I'm just paying attention to the earth, when I'm paying attention to something outside myself, and I'm reconnecting with that, even that childlikeness. I wanted to read you a poem that's in Native because it's exactly what I wrote this poem as I was like staring out a window. And I think that so much of my words are sort of born in that space. And then I want to ask you a little bit about how this has been true for you. So this is a poem from Native. When the wind blows, we imagine she is erasing every injustice, sweeping misdoings from the east to the west, making room for something new, a more whole world. Instead, what we don't realize is that she is rustling the tree branches to sing us a song. Instead, she is sowing seeds across the landscapes, seeds that tomorrow will become the beauty that restores us. Instead, she is whispering for us to hold on, to keep going, to water those seeds, because one day they will show us the way home.
Mm.
And, you know, in a lot of your writing, Barbara, you also write beautifully about nature and about the earth and your connection to it. And so I just wonder within this lesson that as humans, we need to honor our connection to the earth. You write about the land you live on. You've written about a lot of these things. What has that meant to you throughout your life? Has it changed? Do you feel childlikeness when you're drawn to the earth? What does it mean to you?
Well, I'm chastened by the earlier speakers because I could take the rest of the hour on this. But I do greet you from Ichoto Road
Yeah.
in rural Habersham County, where the land on which I live, I inherited from others. And there are still boundary markers here from when this land was taken from the Cherokee Nation and given to other people. So there are tears, deep, deep tears here, and deep, deep blessing on this land. And I have been so changed by living here. Your phrasing of the question was all humans need to honor our connection with the earth. And I just circled the verb and said, will honor our connection with the earth, willingly or unwillingly.
Yeah.
Because at least in my dominant religious tradition, from dust we came, and to dust we will go. And we will go into the same dust that gave rise to our ancestors and that will receive us. So I am incredibly aware of how my life comes from this land, and that many of the blessings that come to me, whether it's in the form of vegetables or friends or spirits that inhabit this place, that I owe my life to this. I have a lot of friends very attuned to trees right now. And I have, they say I should adopt a tree, Kaitlin, but you may appreciate that I have put myself out for adoption by a tree. Any tree that will have me, I'm willing. And I was sitting under a winged elm the other day and it said, I'm considering you. And I said, but you're not what I had in mind at all. It said, I'm considering you. I'll let you know. But the idea of the trees right now is very strong for me because they can't run away from anything. They saw the removal of the Cherokee. They've seen lynchings. They have seen all the injustices in your poems, and still they scatter their seed. And that makes me want to cry right here on a computer screen. So yeah, we will honor our connection with the earth, willingly or unwillingly. And if we pay attention, I think the rhythms of this land are echoes of resurrection, reincarnation, whatever language we have for that in our spiritual vocabularies. It started under our feet and over our heads.
Yeah. I love that. Ever since Native came out, I've been thinking about, how many of us Americans or Westerners, whatever, we don't really like the idea of becoming humble. Maybe it feels like we're giving up or giving in, maybe like, and so to think, for me, like learning to sit beneath a tree, learning to say, you're older than me, like you're my elder and you have things to teach me, or to sit by water and say, you have seen so much, like you're my elder, to think that way, that not just there are relatives or our kin, but like, know more than I do, is such a different way of belonging in the world than what I grew up with in the Southern Baptist Church, certainly. And reconnecting with that sense has been really meaningful for me. And it has made me more childlike in the process, which is another thing that we, resist as adults. And I think that there's such beauty in saying, actually, I want to be humble and learn again, and how much we learn if we do that,
Mm-hmm. And you said child, how we also get to revisit, that young part of ourselves. Who doesn't remember playing in tree roots at some point, or even fooling with the grass between the cracks in sidewalk blocks, but the way in which the greenness surprised us.
Right. Yeah. All right. Let's move on to lesson number 6, which is we all have a creation story to tell. We all have a creation story to tell. And of course, I spend, the first part of Native on my creation story, and on, the creation story of the religion I follow, or the creation story of my people. You know, I kind of share these different aspects of what a creation story might be. And you know, I just think about the power of storytelling. Like, you have been a pastor and a professor, and you know, you're a writer of memoirs. So I know stories are important to you. They're important to us. And so, you know, what do stories mean to you? Why are they important?
I want to talk about recreation stories,
Mm,
see, because
okay.
we inherit creation stories.
Yeah.
And yet, if we're lucky, and as you can tell from the color of my hair, I've gotten to recreate several times now. And what is wonderful about story is the way in which you take what's been given to you, and your life comes into that, and the spirit blows on that, and the story is recreated. It's recreated in your own place and time and community. So I get fascinated with the recreation stories and the ways in which they're not individual. You know, we make them with the trees and with the neighbors and with the seasons and with the changes, but I love the recreation of the stories. So I'll take them all. I mean, I welcome all comers, but I also ask their permission, you know, for me to taste them and translate them and say them back with my own dialect, my own inflections in it, being mindful of everyone I've inherited them from and who might inherit them after me, and giving those people full permission to recreate my stories. Have at them.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love that so much. And it speaks to this idea that you know, if our stories are cyclical and seasonal, that means, you know, they're not this linear way that we talk about things, you know, the reincarnation of our story, or whatever, like you're saying, whatever language you want to use, it's cyclical. It's not like the story doesn't have to end at a certain point, because you get to keep going. You get to, or step back and then step forward again. And it just becomes a beautiful cycle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's sometimes why I prefer the scientific creation story, you know, that something came out of nothing and we don't know exactly how, but if we listen, we can hear the echoes, you know, of a universe that's expanding and in which we are not dominant. We are not in charge. You know, we're this little tiny galaxy way off at the edge of what, I don't know, but there's a humility in that, isn't there? Like sitting under a tree, of the scientific creation story, you know, of something came out of nothing. And if we listen, we hear the echoes of that, but it's not remotely done. Who knows where it ends? So
Yeah.
welcome to the story.
Right. Yeah. In the very beginning of Native, I have a poem, and I say, you know, before there was nothing, there was something, and we are just dust from its long flowing robe. And I just think that, when I finally just stopped and thought, well, how did we, and what comes after? And, you know, and it is mind boggling, but that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it is. It's one, not everyone can move from the city to the country, although some people are in the country and have never been to a city. But what I love about living where I live is in the city, human beings built everything I saw. And where I live now, human beings did not build everything I see. What I see far surpasses what human beings have made. The Tower of Babel has not gone near Mars yet. So it's up there. And so is Venus, blue and red.
Yes.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you so much for being here with us.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to move on to lesson number 7. And this is, if we are Christians, we are complicit in colonization. If we are Christians, if we call ourselves Christians, we are complicit in colonization. And I want to read to you something from my book. And again, this may be one of those hard things for people to take in as well. And, you know, I'm asked all the time, how can you be Indigenous and be a Christian? And I share that it's confusing every day. That's the best I can say, is that it's really hard. And I'm not really sure what I believe from day to day. And also I'm okay with that, you know? But the thing that is important is, you know, part of why I wrote this book was because we need to have this conversation. It's not a conversation we have in the context of America that we know today, and the America that we don't want to talk about, right? Which is the America that so many Indigenous people have known. So for Christians and for the church to avoid this topic, to avoid this subject, is damaging, and it's colonizing again and again. And right. And so we need to reckon with our complicity. We need to reckon with this reality. And so I want to read to you from this. This is called a section called "The Pain of Church Spaces." Many people are asking if the colonizer institutional church can look any different than it has in the past. I believe that if it is ever going to look different, the church has to see its complicity in white supremacy throughout the centuries. It has to look at its own legacy, and it has to own that legacy. The American church must see that it has been partnered with capitalistic empire for far too long. The church must find a new way, or the anger that so many of us experience will go unseen, and the church will continue to go unchecked. So the real question is this: who gains life when we deconstruct these systems of whiteness, white supremacy, and toxic patriarchy? Everyone. Who loses out when we refuse to take a deep look at our own toxic systems? Everyone. For the average middle-class white person in church today, the lack of knowledge about our history of colonization within the walls of white American churches means that relationships that bring true and whole transformation are not available. Without these conversations, those people in those churches and those institutions miss out on important opportunities for transformation. So when we talk about decolonizing, we aren't just talking about wholeness for the oppressed or for Indigenous peoples. Ideas of equity and transparency will mark the path that leads to wholeness for everyone. Power distorts the soul. Empire distorts. Oppression distorts. Systems of whiteness distort. The question is, how much do we want to see? Because once we see, we cannot unsee. And once we know, we cannot unknow. The white church is afraid. But oh, the liberation that waits on the other side of knowing. Oh, the wholeness and the togetherness that comes with healing. This is the power of decolonizing. This is the grace that comes with seeing. This is why the anger of Indigenous people, Black people, other people of color is so important. It's why the anger of women is so important. Something must change. And when it does, it will bring us all closer to our own humanity and to the holy mystery of God, a closeness only birthed through the journey of pain. So that's lesson number 7. If we are Christians, we are complicit in colonization. All right, lesson number 8, I want to invite Joél on, and Joel's going to share some poetry with us. And so we're going to start with that, and then we'll have a conversation. Hello.
Hey, Kaitlin, this has been great. So thank you for having me share space with you and these wonderful panelists. So the piece I'm going to be sharing has a lot to do with language, and I also think about, we talk about reclaiming, not just honoring the land that we stay on, but also honoring the language of our elders and our ancestors. And so for me, that goes back to poetry. And so this piece is titled "Poetry Will Save the World." There we go. Everything in the world feels like it is burning. This is not Burning Man, no, a new TV show or a plan for a diet infomercial. We are all in this boat we had no plan to be in, watching the shore and wondering what next. The questions we ask, all clinging to answers tied to science rooted in vaccinations and GoFundMes and donation pledges. Our faith has left office and now sits with R&B singers and Hollywood power couples. We are dancing for salvation, painting for salvation. We are performing and doing acrobatics in our living rooms, holding handstands. We are in churches, masks over our nose, praying for a Bible to come from the front row with a benediction, thinking it will rain on us, an offering at our feet, so thick, so deep in pedagogy that it will misdirect whatever is falling from the sky. In all of this, we can see the religion beautifully encrusted in the hands of the artists, the ones who are alive when things like government, like AIDS, like SARS, like atom bombs and Jim Crow and internment camps tell us to stay home, when concentration camps and bickering between parties become podcast press. In these times, art has been the beacon right here, laying on the surface of it all. It's a poem. There is a poem in everything. I've seen it happen often, the scattering of words that happens when we have been afforded the time to be amongst the dreary. The days get to bend with poems. They get to take shape in our hands into specially crafted molds that take the everything we find insufferable and put it into a language, into a context we get to understand on our own terms and embrace. This is where the poem ends and we begin. I have read poems about suffrage, about Pokemon, Pokeballs, about bowel movements, about hand sanitizer and couch cushions, about being comfy and being a cougar, about being a coon, about being negligent, about rape, race, radical love. All those things have a reason to live, to exist. When the world became cold, poems in the affable still resonated. Still pictures of us borderline everything on the DSM scale, but making it poetry. Poems are dying, people are dying. They are hurting while worried about their futures, about their pensions, and the pennies never saved, the voice notes never sent. How can they reconcile that? We are all wrought, all ducking the drowning that happens when the drought is over and the overboard becomes as heavy and as weighty as the idea of floating away. It is then that we pick up the dusty pen and notepads and search for the meaning behind whatever is shaking us down, because you see, we are all poets. We are all alchemists. We have all had a poem lingering, wistful and watery, buoying us through the tough and tranquil, through the trough and trials of being a martyr and just a speck of matter on a glass. Every poem I have loved started in a person first, and that has made me want to see the world differently. This has made me want to hold my daughters higher than the sky could ever permit. Poems allow us the luxury to do that. We would mutilate ourselves to poems. We would remember our slave masters with poems. We would cry to R&B songs, talk to hummingbirds, travel to palm trees, rub palm oil on everything with poems. Poems taught us how to talk to girls, how to talk non-binary, how to bring someone to your mother, how to learn the way your mother crocheted her way through life, made a machete out of all the moons they could. All of these poems mattered to me. They matter to us now more than ever. Please write all the poems now and often. Break them open with your teeth with a pen. Take them from the pit of your stomach and shout them out. Make them loud. Poetry will be our greatest soundtrack. Our ears to the streets, soapboxes replete with box sets of the latest and greatest, from street corner church revivers, from porno turned photo all-stars, from those that study genetics all the way down to the laws of tea and pottery. Poets grow stems, do STEM research, make masks, wear masks for safety, for optical illusions, do makeup tutorials, get titty lifts, deadlift essays, and shine shoes. Poets will clean from windows, practice hang time, hang themselves from balconies, from branches, will hang their art on their cars, on their graves, on their teacher's tombstone. A poem is a dancer, a seed in a pomegranate, the eruptions in Pompeii. Poems, they say, are pompous, derivative of the bourgeoisie and the burdened. Poems are about pussy, about politics, about anonymous people and the private parts they love. The world is changing, but poems are not. Poems still deified, still dying, still dripping in the sweat of all of our ancestors. You see, poems are slaying dragons. They are saving us even still, because poems will save the world.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you.
So I'm going to swap our lessons. So we're going to move the lessons, because this goes right into what we're going to talk about. And so we'll talk about ancestors in a minute. So for everyone who has no idea what I'm talking about, lesson number 8 is going to be that poetry and words are medicine. And I just love this because, you know, what I've appreciated so much about you is that you use words as medicine. You use them. And I've seen this on social media, and I've told you this multiple times, but social media can be so exhausting. It can be so toxic. There can be so much painful energy there. And every single time I read one of your tweets or your poetry or your words, they cause me to stop and breathe. And we can't underestimate the power of that. Like we really can't. Like words and poetry are medicine. I included poetry in my book for that reason, because I needed people to be able to stop and breathe as a native, you know, like a way to just let us catch our breath for a second before we dive into hard things, you know?
Yeah.
And I just would love to hear you speak a little to that. How is poetry, how are words medicine, good medicine for us?
Well, I mean, I think poetry has kept me alive. You know, the reason I wrote the piece and the reason why I'm so always grateful to share a space with you is because you two are a appreciator and user of words and using words intentionally. I think for me, it's always been very important to be absolutely intentional with the words I choose, especially when we're talking about sharing across social media.
Yeah.
Whether it be poetry, whether it be a tweet, whether it be engaging in some kind of conversation, Instagram, Twitter, whatever, a DM, but really trying to be intentional about words because words have power. To your point, they are medicine. They can also be used as weapons. You know, we've seen in, you know, for a long while. I mean, America's history has been weaponizing words, dog whistles. The past administration's weaponization of words, I think, is what led to a lot of the carnage and pain and suffering we saw and still continue to see. And so I think for me, it's just being mindful of how I choose words and then also being mindful of the people I keep around me who are also following those same strict guidelines. I think of ensuring that the words that they're putting out there into the world and into the universe, they recognize the intention and the power behind them.
Yeah, and it takes effort to, in a world where words are so fast on social
Mm,
media, it takes effort to say, I'm not going to say this thing, but I'm going to put energy into this other thing that I want to say. That might not
mhm,
be, the thing I wanted to say, but it's important and
mhm.
it's more healing than my reactionary comment. Or you know what I mean? Like, and it's hard. It is hard to do that. And it takes serious intention. And Asha's the same way. Her social media, especially on Instagram, she crafts and curates her space so well.
Mhm.
And I appreciate that about both of you. And it's helped me to keep doing that for myself. And you're right, words are absolutely used as weapons. And how can we show others that they can be healing, they can be good medicine?
Right. And like that healing and the healing and the use of words as medicine is not void of accountability. It's not void of holding people's feet to the fire in order to ensure that we are recognizing the plights and the struggles of the BIPOC community, of Indigenous folks, of marginalized communities, of those who have honestly and unfortunately, and like I think how you explained so well, not just in Native, but like during the Zoom call, like the harm that America and the thought process of being American, right, and what that has done, I think, to communities,
Right.
and some of that really goes back to understanding that the power we all have, and having and using words in a way that affirm people while also again challenge.
Yeah.
And for me, it's always been about challenging with love, and love again does not mean me softly communicating my desires, but I think there's love and anger.
Yeah.
Right, there is love in that tension, and I think being able to address that in a loving way, in a sincere way, honest and intentional way, and using words to do that is important. It's been a practice that I'm still trying to perfect. I never will, but it's a practice that I'm deeply invested in, as you are as well.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. So as we jump to the next one, so the next lesson number 9, is that we all need to reckon with the lives and stories of our ancestors. And so I want to read you a poem, and then we'll talk about this for a few minutes. This is a poem I wrote, sort of to one of my ancestors, and I wrote it in Native.
Mm,
I wanted to read that to kind of connect, the power of poetry and words as healing, and also to connect to our ancestors.
yeah.
So this is from Native. Passed on one, I see you there. Not your skin and bones, nor the frame that once held you. I see your aura, your spirit, your essence. I see the glow of who you once were and who you are today. I see somehow the imprint of what you've left me here. It's not a thumbprint, but some other form of spirit code. Somehow the shape of you carves lines into the essence of who I am. Somehow I am enough because you were enough. Ancestor, your name will always be the sound of breath in my lungs. Ancestor, your face will always look like the face of my own children. Ancestor, your essence will always feel like the wind when it slips through the tree branches singing a song. You, dear one, lead me still. I feel the gifts you've left me, and I wonder how much more is waiting. I learn my own way as I reckon with your mistakes and realize that you were human once, like I am human now. I wonder how much you notice from the other side. What does God feel like? I'll wait, and one day you'll show me. So this lesson is, we're all reckoning with the stories and lives of our ancestors. And I know in some communities we talk about ancestors more than others. And but I think it's important for all of us to talk about who we come from, and to reckon with it or honor them, however we want to use those words to frame that. But what do your ancestors mean to you today?
Well, I mean, thank you for sharing that, first of all, Kaitlin. And for me, I think when I think about ancestors, I don't just think about like my genetic family tree. I tend to think about the Nikki Giovannis of the world who are still living, the Sonia Sanchez's of the world, the Amiri Barakas of the world, the Toni Morrisons of the world. Like we are all so interconnected, and the work is so interwoven, and for me especially, and how I try to show up as a writer, as a poet. And so when I think of my ancestors, I think of those who laid the foundation for me to show up, to continue to do the work that they left behind, or continue on with the work that they're still doing. That ancestral energy is carried in all of us to a certain extent. And when we can, I love how you said reckon, like when we are aware of that, when we can acknowledge it, when we can tap into it. I've seen it happen in my work where I wonder where a thought or a phrase or an idea came from, and knowing that it's not just me that's doing the work, right? And I think collectively, like when I leave here, then I too become a part of that story. Elizabeth Gilbert in her book Big Magic, she talked, I forget how she described it, but like an idea cloud, essentially, where we're all kind of, once we think it all kind of floats up here and then it lands wherever it lands. And I think our ancestors, the ancestral energy very much lives in that way. And that when we call upon them, so much in the way I think, and in the way Asha was, in the way that your poetry does, when we call on them, they're listening to us, they're watching us, and so I think when we're aware of it and tap into the work, the power in our work is palpable for sure.
Yes. Oh, thank you so much, Joél. I'm so.
Oh no, thank you. This was amazing. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
All right, we're gonna move on to the last lesson of the evening. Lesson number 10. We made it. Lesson number 10 is one of my favorite lessons to talk about when I do speaking events in so many spaces, because it's really important, I think. Decolonizing is lifelong work. And I talked about this a little bit with Barbara, but this idea of thinking of things not in a linear way, not in a okay, I started decolonizing on this day at point A, and I'm going to be done in a week after I read these 5 books at point B. That's not the way it works, and to think in the way that we're learning to be poets, and the way that we're learning to tell the truth about history, and the way that we're learning to reckon with the lives of our ancestors, all of these things, all of the things that we do in our everyday life, it's a lifelong goal. And I don't want us to get trapped in this idea that we have to make it in a certain amount of time and then be on the other side of decolonizing work, or be on the other side of this. Now, I hope that future generations get that they get to inherit a better world than maybe we have. I hope that there are systems of colonization that have been broken, that have been dismantled, but we have to recognize that in our lives, we get to hold this and recognize that it will take our whole lives, that we are doing this as long as we possibly can, that we're doing this work and that we don't have to think of it as get from point A to point B, but we think of this work as sort of this cyclical, seasonal work, right? It's ebbing and flowing, it's moving, and to realize that that movement is really important. And so that's lesson number 10, is that decolonization work, it's lifelong, it's a journey, it's a lifelong journey. And so I have this thing that I share at some of my speaking events, and I want to just share it all with you if you haven't heard me share about it. Later on, if you have a journal or a big piece of paper, draw a big circle, and that circle represents your life. It represents your life journey, this idea of journeying, of decolonizing, whatever you want, however you want to frame that. But it's a circle because that represents this idea that we are always journeying, right? We're always beginning something. We're always maybe ending something or re-beginning something, right? We're having these recreation stories like Barbara shared. And so when we think about decolonization as a lifelong journey and that cycle is our life, what do you picture inside that circle? Maybe there are images, maybe there are these kind of pivotal moments throughout your life. Put them in the circle, but don't do it on a timeline. Do it within this circle that represents your life. Where do you hope to be in 10 years? What's a dream you have? Put that inside the circle. And then see how the circle changes, draw it tonight after we're done, and then go back to it in a month and see if maybe you have other things you want to add to the circle. It could be full. The circle could have one thing in the middle, one word, one phrase to represent you. But do this. I would love for you to do this and to share with me later. Find me on social media and let me know what you put in your circle or what your circle represents. But I just want to share that to remind us that we are doing this work lifelong. It is that circle represents our lifelong journey, and we're constantly, if we're dedicated to doing it, it's okay to recognize that it's important and that it's lifelong. It's lifelong work. So I want to end with a reading. I ended Native by focusing on the future generations, right? I believe that I live on this continuum of life. I have my ancestors who came before me and who speak to me still, and I live my life now. And I recognize that, the 7 generations after me, not just my children, but the children of the community, the children that I interact with, any of them, they're coming after us, the great-grandchildren, the great-great-grandchildren, and we leave them something. And so the ways that we live today will continue in them. And so I ended Native with just reflecting on the children, because they are our future generations, and my own children have taught me so much about this work. So I just want to read this little section, and it's chapter 20, and it's called A New World for Our Children. In our Potawatomi teachings, we believe we are in the time of the 7th fire, the 7th prophecy, when the young people will return to our ways, take up our traditions, learn our language, and put things right again. It must be the young people because they are our future. I did not know growing up my tribe's history. I did not grow up knowing that we had our own language or our own stories. I grew up celebrating the daring work of Columbus, just like other children around me. Now that I am a mother, I want to give my children a better story, so that when they come up against injustice, they know the truth. I want them to have the truth embedded in their own stories, so that when they come across injustice toward others, they can connect the dots and see that oppression comes in many forms, that the oppressed must stand up for one another, and that we must use our privilege in its varying layers to make change when and where we can. I want them to understand who they came from and that their identity carries privilege that they must use for good. Empowering our children, whether they are our children biologically or children in our community, means letting the stories of the oppressed reach them. And if they are descendants of the oppressed, letting their bodies and souls sink into their own reality, so that they become the fire that burns bright for future generations. It means that sometimes we need to let our children see our anger, and we need to let them see us channel that anger into good that transforms something, somewhere, somehow. Lately at the dinner table, and then again at bedtime, my kids ask us to tell them stories from our childhood. We don't just tell them the great ones, because at the end of the day, our children don't need to see us tallying off all the ways that we've behaved or been blessed throughout our life. They need to see that we are human. They need to hear our stories of grief and pain, our stories of celebration, our stories of loss. We need to name some of our mistakes for them. We need to tell the truth about the systems that we work with and against. Our children will take those stories with them, and they will remember that it is important to listen to the land. They will remember that it is important to pay attention to mistakes and listen to their own souls. They will remember our stories, and our stories will shape them. Our own vulnerability with the truth will teach them to be vulnerable with the truth. And with that, they will lead us all. So I'm just so happy with this event tonight. I'm so grateful that all of you showed up to be with us. I'm so grateful to my 3 friends for joining me. It really just means the world to have these people that some I've met in real life, some I haven't, and we just hold space with one another, and that means so much to me. So thank you so much for being here. Thank all of you for showing up. Thank you for reading Native. Please share it with people you love. Ask them to read it. Have book clubs, anything you can to celebrate this book, as I am truly celebrating it, that it's been out in the world for a year, and I'm so grateful to the people it has reached. I'm so grateful that I get to be a part of your lives and that you get to be a part of mine in this way. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us.